Good evening. I'm Bertrand Buchalter. I'm the director of the Institut Français in the United Kingdom, and I'm very happy with all my team to welcome you tonight for this great event. Tonight we'll have a great panel with 4 women composers joined by a filmmaker. And it's part of our bilateral fund, Diaphonique. Diaphonique is a Franco-British fund which supports new music and contemporary music. New music has been at the very heart of music collaborations between France and the UK. It is of we attach the utmost importance to our cooperation in this field, and I would also like to seize this opportunity to underline how much we are attached and committed to also the mobility of artists, to the mobility of musicians. We want to continue to make sure that musicians can perform easily and smoothly across both sides of the channel. Tonight, I would like to extend our warmest thanks and our warmest also welcome to all the friends and partners of Diaphonique. There is an ongoing call for application, which is online. So please join us online. Please consult our website. This call for application is going on till the 16th of May. I would like also to thank all our partners. We have lots of friends and lots of partners which are supporting Diaphonique and which have been supporting Diaphonique for more than 10 years now. I would like to extend our thanks to SACEM, to the Centre National de la Musique, to the British Council, obviously, to Creative Scotland, to the Fondation Francis and Mika Salabert. And I would also like to thank all our private donors, past and present. I would like to thank the Trust of the French Institute. And I would like to pay also like a special, to extend a special thanks to Aline Foriel-Dessezé, whose support and whose trust has enabled us to support and to fund great projects over the last years. We are delighted tonight to be joined by Susanna Easburn, former jury member of Diaphonique and the CEO of Sound and Music, the UK's national organization for new music. And we've been very interested by the report that you have released recently together with some partners with the Ivers Academy on the impact of COVID-19 on composers, and we are looking forward to read more about your findings. So we are joined tonight by 4 composers: Clementine March, Jamie Mann, Tansy Davis, and Laura Bola. We are also joined by Lisa Hoffner, filmmaker. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. I'm going to slide here on the side. And Lisa, your documentary is released tonight. Modern Films. It's a great documentary. It has received huge accolades already, and we are very thrilled to have you also tonight with us. Sisters with Transistors is about those women pioneers in the field of electronic music who have completely redefined the boundaries of music, and we can't also wait to listen to you about your documentary. So thank you, and without further ado, I am giving the floor to Susanna Easburn. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Bertrand, and welcome everybody. It's a huge pleasure to be here for tonight's event, and particularly so to be here in person with colleagues, which feels like a huge privilege and a great joy. So welcome to my wonderful fellow panelists, and also welcome to everybody who's listening in out there online. We're in for a really great evening of conversations and wonderful music brought into your own homes. This is the 3rd annual event that Diaphonique has supported, which is dedicated to the role of women in contemporary and classical music. And alas, it's the 2nd of these events that's had to take place in these conditions of social distancing. But we're going to be talking tonight about some really chunky, juicy topics. We're going to be talking about gender equality for women composers in the past and in the present. We're going to talk about how the COVID-19 pandemic and all the social restrictions have impacted on artists and their creativity. We'll talk about the role of the artist in society. What should it be? What would we like it to be? And we'll talk about how the different roles of France and the UK can play different parts in the development of artists. But we're going to start by setting out some historical context for the subject. And I'm going to turn now to the filmmaker, Lisa Rufner, who, as Bertrand has already said, she is the filmmaker behind the amazing film Sisters with Transistors, which is released today. And it's available to watch via various platforms, including the Institut Français website. And I'm going to start with, there's actually one of my favorite quotes in this remarkable film, which I really urge everybody to watch, because it's just astonishing. But one of my very famous quotes is from the marvelous Pauline Oliveros. And she says, "How do you exercise the canon of classical music of misogyny? With 2 oscillators, a turntable, and tape delay." So I guess I wanted to start by asking you, what is it particularly about women and electronic music that features in this film that you're trying to uncover somehow?
Thank you. Composing was controversial when many of the women featured in the film existed, or got their start. So electronic music was this. These electronic instruments were a way for women to circumvent the establishment. And as Suzanne Ciani talks about in the film, this was a way for, with electronics, you were the composer, you were the performer, you were the sole arbiter of your creation, and you could get your music directly to audiences. So it was enabling, it was liberating to work with electronics for women who traditionally had no outlet for women composers who traditionally had no outlet for their compositions.
And one of the things I really enjoyed about the film is the range of women and music, and they're all working in electronics. But can you just, for the benefit of the audience who won't have seen the film yet, can you just talk about some of the people you feature and some of the things that you were exploring with when you were unearthing the archives?
Sure. So the film starts out in the 1920s with Clara Rockmore, who is one of the first women to work with an electronic medium. She worked with the theremin. So the theremin is an instrument which was created by theremin, Leon Theremin. And basically it's a really fascinating instrument because you sculpt through the air. So it's a fascinating way of it's like magic, basically. So it was just incredible to see her kind of sculpting the air and creating this really precise, beautiful music. And then we go to post-World War II, when women were finally able to penetrate what were traditionally male jobs. So we're able to penetrate the radio, BBC, the French equivalent, Radio France. And these women really got their start because men were at war. So it's really quite interesting how the connection between war and women having access to tape recorders. And the tape machine basically was this new tool for composition. It was obviously created for purposes of communication and war, but then repurposed by a group of visionary men and women. And it was just really fascinating because I think so much of when we think of electronic music, we think so much about men, pushing the boundaries and the knobs and the buttons. And it was just amazing for me to discover that there was this whole group of women who were doing it at the same time, but whose history was lost to the canon, these women's stories were eclipsed by history.
And that's so right. I think of someone like Delia Derbyshire, who basically is behind the Doctor Who theme, but that was sort of hidden. That was a fact that people didn't realize until really quite recently. And you're right. And it's like historically people think of that post-war generation of electronic composers. They think automatically of people like Stockhausen, and they forget the incredible pioneering work of people like Delia Derbyshire, Daphne Oram. Why do you think, or how and why is it that these incredible voices of great originality and these amazing personalities which kind of leap off the screen, how can it be that these people just are somehow silenced, or their voices are so diminished by history?
Well, I think it's for many reasons. I think mainly it's just that history has been written by men, and for that reason, so many women's stories has been a story of silence. Women have. We're just uncovering now just how many women have played an important role in music and art, in science. It's fascinating to me, but I also think it's. I've been thinking about this so much, obviously, in making this film, because all these women were recorded, so they were acknowledged at the time. But it's just how we've told the story, how we've written the canon, that has led to their erasure. And I really believe it's the way that we tell stories. I think that we have traditionally told stories with a focus on a hero, generally a sole male genius. That is I think has led to the erasure of all these women.
And that's very interesting, because many of them also do talk about the kind of how they work with people. I'm thinking, for example, of Eliane Radig, and who talks a lot about how she was working with Pierre Schaeffer. I also wanted to ask, what do you think was the most what were some of the really surprising stories that you unearthed when you were making this film?
Yeah, I think the thing that I was the most surprised by was just how eloquent these women were in their interviews. It was not something I was expecting. I had seen, the thing that really drew me originally to the story was obviously the sounds that these women were making, and also the images that I saw of them with these big machines. It like piqued my interest, and then I kind of went into a tunnel of listening to their music and was really blown away by the sounds and by the how unique they were. Many of them were using tape, and many of them were using synthesizers, but they all have such a unique way of expressing themselves through these similar tools, or through the same tools. But yeah, in going through and really unearthing this archive, I was just blown away by how rich the audio interviews that I found are.
They are extraordinary. I actually just wanted to open this up to the other panelists, because something you said at the beginning came over very strongly in the film, which is that, and in fact, Ramona Gonzalez in the film comments, these are all DIY artists, and all of them have had to create their own thing rather than working within pre-existing structures. And I guess just looking around at the rest of the panel, is that something that is familiar to any of you? Is that still something that can feel the case today? Clementine is nodding.
Definitely. Yeah, I guess a part of it is linked to a personal choice and how I got into music, which is not academic at all. But another part I find is quite something that has to do with no expectations upon us, which is a bit liberating as well in a way. And also maybe we're a bit lucky to have some role models these days. Maybe they were more missing like 50 years or 40 years ago, but we have in the 90s or noughties, we had more successful, but in a good way, breaking boundaries female composers. I'm obviously thinking about Björk, who made the joint between erudite and pop music, but obviously the list is very long. So yeah, that's how I feel about DIY.
Any of the others? I'm looking at Laura, who I know you've done so much of your own stuff.
I think I actually felt more of these kind of blocks preventing me from making the work that I wanted to do earlier on in my career, especially when I was a student or when I was attending summer schools in different countries. I frequently found that I was the only female present. So it would be myself and 7 male composers, and quite often even an ensemble that was entirely male that we were writing for. And inevitably in that environment, it's very difficult to kind of, have one's own voice, whether it be musically or just in the space, literally speaking. And I think that actually can be quite a hindrance to learning when you're a young female creative. And I really felt it very strongly at that point.
It's very interesting, the point about role models that you make, which is referenced in the film. Suzanne Ciani in the film talks about role models, and it was talked about at this panel this time last year. And clearly, it is a massive issue. But Lisa, you have created this film with these people who can be role models. it may be impossible to say specifically, but what kind of impact do you want this film to have? What would you like people to go away and think about and do as a result of having seen this beautiful film?
Well, the answer to that is there are many answers to that, but yeah, I hope it inspires an entirely new generation of young people, not only women, but men as well, just people who want to create. There's so many, it's not just about gender. It's also, it is very much about gender, obviously, but these women had no role models. So it's fantastic that we have them now. But yeah, I just hope that people walk away with more curiosity to listen. I think this is one of the big themes of the film is the power of listening, of an active listening, of an engaged listening. And yeah, I hope that it inspires. Yeah, I hope women feel more comfortable taking that space, taking that role, knowing that there's a lineage there.
Great, thank you so much. Are we ready to show the trailer now?
Now, first of all, why do you have this stuff? What do you do with this?
Well, this is how I make a living.
I mean,
I just wanted to be introduced as a composer and to start to point out how hard it was for women to be taken seriously as creators of music.
This is the story of women who hear music in their heads, of radical sounds. This is the story of dreams enabled by technology.
Using all of these, we can build up any sound we can possibly imagine.
In electronics, you're dealing in energy.
Technology is a tremendous liberator. It blows up power structures.
We shall not be robbed any longer.
You could make something with electronics and you can present music directly to your audience. Somehow women get forgotten from the history.
The history of women has been a story of silence, of breaking through the silence, with beautiful noise.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This is such a gorgeous film. I really urge everyone to watch it. It deserves to win all the prizes. And it's now available for viewing on many, many platforms. So yeah, please do check it out. I want to turn now to the rest of the panel and actually introduce them. So we have here on my extreme right, Laura Bola. And all these composers, by the way, are composers who've been supported through the Diaphonique Fund, and we'll talk about some of their projects later. But Laura created a project, Two Cellos, which was a co-commission between Sound Festival and Détour de Babel, and that was in 2019. And we actually see an extract of that in a bit, which will be great. I'd like to introduce Clementine March, who was involved in the Music City project, which happened in 2020, but in a different form from maybe how it was originally planned because of the situation. Tansy Davis, to my immediate right, who had a co-commission between Ensemble Court Circuit and Sound Festival to create a new trio for violin, horn and piano. And Jamie Mann, on my extreme left, whose orchestral piece, Connaissez-vous le cri de Chocard, was commissioned by the Orchestre de Chambre de Paris in 2020 and hopefully will be premiered soon. But the latter three of these projects have all been affected by the pandemic. So we might come on later to whether they were reframed or rescheduled and how this whole strange last year has affected them. But now coming back to the trailer of the film we've just seen and the discussion we had before about these amazing pioneering women electronic composers whose voices were then not heard, whose histories were diminished, and who were just not quite taken as seriously as some of their male colleagues. Were there things in that you recognised in your contemporary experience? Maybe times when you have been treated differently from your male colleagues? Is that something that any of you have experienced?
I can jump in.
Thank you, Laura.
I have one very particular experience. I've had several, but one always stands out to me, which was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I think. And I'd been for an interview for a composer in residence position, and I was lucky enough to get down to the last 2, but I didn't get the role. And then I received a call from the artistic director, who was male, who spoke to me on the phone and told me that he didn't feel, he found it intimidating because the way that I looked didn't marry with the music that I wrote.
I'm quite stunned by that.
Yes.
And how did you respond? How did you respond, and how would you have liked to respond in retrospect?
Unfortunately, 7, 8 years ago, I was less self-assured than I am now, I think. And obviously, I just kind of, stayed silent on the phone and just listened to everything else that the person had to say to me. And it wasn't until after the phone call had finished that I kind of reflected on what had been said, and then was obviously furious about it. I think if it was now, I would actually confront it straight away. But that's after years of practice, I suppose, in these situations, and you gain the confidence to actually say, actually, that's not okay for you to say that. So, and it's irrelevant what I look like. So, yeah.
Wow. What about others on the panel? Have you had experiences where you've known that somehow there has been a difference in how you've been treated? It could be in what you've been paid. It could be in what you've been asked to do, and also in the sort of the kind of casual sexism, I'm going to just put a label on it, that Laura's just described as well. Are those experiences that others of you have had?
I never had like really serious, actually never in the UK, I have to say, more in France. But I remember it can be either funny or sometimes quite more, it could be very annoying, but sometimes I would get into it a bit later. It was never at the right moment. I was like, okay, what? And that's also the problem, because sometimes some things don't appear as they are straight away to us because we kind of internalizing things. The most funny thing I had was, it's not funny actually, but it seemed innocent. It was me playing. I'm a bass player when I'm not like writing music, and I'm playing with a regular instrument, and I'm not very tall. So I was told like I should get like a half size. It's called short scale bass to play because it would feel better my look and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't like this instrument. I mean, I like it a lot, but it's not my grip on it. And why should I do that to please you? It was really like, and it's a microaggression. It's not something, obviously, you could make a list of what is really serious, but well, it's still like a bit annoying. In a more annoying way, it was more about things about, yeah, you write really good music, you should give it to someone else to perform it, or things like that. It was not necessarily gender based, but I couldn't help myself thinking about like what would have it been if I were a man, for example. And so yeah, it was all these suspicions of things where you feel like you're treated slightly differently. I think that's the most difficult sometimes to get, because I don't know how to react to that.
And it can be very subtle, as you say. It can be either obvious, as in Laura's example, or subtle, and both are damaging. I don't know, Jamie and Tansy, has it all been okay, or have you had similar troubling or difficult experiences? Tansy?
To be honest, I can't really think of any specific thing. I think, we all have different problems that we face through life and different traumas, large and small. And I think by the time it got to the age of me, getting into the world of having my music played, I had developed a fairly thick skin.
You were a horn player, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So being in the brass section must have...
I guess. I mean, I can't think of anything specific. And I suppose I just... there were lots of other sort of problems I had faced by that time. So it was like, well, that's water off a duck's back to me. So I'm quite lucky in that respect. But also I did feel, generally speaking, pretty much supported by my male colleagues and gatekeepers in London.
Great, thank you. And Jamie, what about you? How has it been for you? Has it been something that has affected you, or have you managed to not it hasn't impacted on you so much?
It's hard. It's really hard to say because, as you say, so much can be very subtle as well, and so much you can maybe not even notice. But I have to say that the one thing that really keeps me going is the role models, the women and the men who really are allies to equality, to wanting change, to wanting diversity within music, not just who makes the music, but music that's different. Because quite often I find I get commissioned, it has happened where I've been commissioned to write a piece, but what they've actually wanted was for me to write a piece similar to what has already been written, i.e. by a man. And there are, of course, women conductors who do write very similarly to the canon, but that's not who I am. But I honestly can't say if it's a gender issue or a cultural issue, but it has for me definitely been easier to be a foreigner in a different country than to be a foreigner in the UK, just because it hurts less because I'm British.
That's very interesting, and we'll come back actually to talking a bit about the let's do it now. Actually, I am quite interested in what you say about it being different internationally than it is in the UK, and it picks up a little bit on Clementine. You talked about it's different in France than the UK sometimes, and all of the composers have worked in France as well as in the UK. Do you feel differences in sort of attitudes towards women between the two countries? Is it something that you've noticed? And Jamie, you say it's actually there's a positive aspect to being a foreigner in a foreign country, as it were, as opposed to how you're treated in the UK. What about others? How do the experiences compare?
I think, it's really obviously personal and how I related to this country, and I'm a foreigner here still. So for me, I just find the scene here less gendered, like in the UK. So I never have to think about those things basically here. Whereas I was finding in France, I was evolving in Paris, and I found it a bit more. I think it's in general. It's not only in music. I think it's more. There is more neutrality here in general between the genders. So that's why that's how I notice differences.
Sorry to jump in, but it's really interesting because I also feel the same as you. I lived in Paris before I lived here, and I feel like here it's like my gender is. It just feels different. I mean, maybe it's I'm older, lots of other reasons, and it's very personal, like as you say. But I was having a conversation with a French friend who was saying that the income inequality in the UK between women and men is actually greater than the income inequality in France. And she had a really interesting explanation for it. Women in France they get free childcare from 6 months. Women in the UK don't. And so what happens is that women are having children later, obviously. And so right when they're at this point in their career where they're about to jump, that's probably when they have children, and they're the ones generally forced to stay home while their husbands stay, or while men stay in those roles and have that opportunity to jump. And then 5 years later, by the time they come back, they're at a kind of lower level, or sometimes it's 3 years. I mean, again, this is a total generalization, but I just think it's very interesting to think about how can we make this society more equal? And I think one of the main things is just give women the opportunity, if they want to, and not everybody does, and that's totally fine, the opportunity to have free access to free childcare.
Absolutely. And actually parental leave, so that also men can take time off and have the so that women can carry on working, which is still culturally very unusual in this country and would make a huge difference. And there's also research out there that points to great disproportion in the commissioning of women, and I think it's getting a bit better now, but there's still women are under commissioned, tend to be commissioned for smaller, lighter pieces. So I think we are on a trajectory, and given that this is the third panel talking about gender equality in contemporary and classical music, it's the third year. Do any of you think are we making progress? Are things getting better? Do you see improvements? Is it getting worse? Is it the same? How's your sense of how this is going forward?
I really feel like it's getting better. I really do. I think in terms of my colleagues who are female composers, and the amount of work that they're getting is actually increasing, and their older work being spotlighted in concert series, and I'm seeing more women's work programmed just in general. So I think that it really is actually improving in the past few years.
And do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, it couldn't get any worse, could it? But I think, actually, there was a very interesting interview that Anish Kapoor did in the Tate magazine recently, a couple months ago. And he said that, basically that what we see in the galleries or what we see on stage really will tell us what we need to know about how the Institute thinks in terms of equality. And as long as the masterpieces or the main galleries are filled with works by European men, dead mostly, and everyone else is on the side, then that will give us an indication of how that institute feels about equality. So until there really is a shared main stage, for me, it's very clear how people feel about these things.
And why? I don't think anyone here would disagree that it's important, but why is it important? If we don't get better at this, if we don't continue to improve, what's the problem with that? What do we achieve by achieving greater equality? Why does it matter? Why should we care about it?
Well, we need to hear so many more stories than we're currently hearing. We need to hear from everyone. Talking about main stage, let's look at main stage opera. How few women composers' works make it to the main stage. So many reasons, but of course, if people really wanted to do it, it would happen, and it needs to happen because we need to hear these stories, because our species absolutely depends on it, and we just can't evolve without that.
I just think it makes the world a more rich place. I mean, a richer place to have more diversity. I'm always, really drawn to stories I haven't heard before. I think that's, one of the more inspiring things.
So why is it so hard? Because it is. I agree with everything you say. That it makes the art better. It tells more stories. It speaks to more people. All the things that we say are important in the arts, but it seems to be such hard work. As you say, Tansy, it's like kind of if the people wanted to do it, it would happen. What is the problem?
Well, speaking from what Tansy was talking about, especially with main stage opera, I'm sure that one of the main reasons is money. I think that institutions are probably afraid to place, female-focused, female narrative-led, non-kind of toxic masculinity, misogynistic opera narratives on the stage because they won't get the audiences, because the audiences actually want what they've been fed for many years, which is the old works by old dead men.
That's a very depressing thought. And of course, post-COVID, who knows what audiences are going to want and how they're going to come back anyway. So it is an interesting moment for us. Laura, I just wanted to turn now to talk about a little bit about your Diaphonique projects. We'll see an excerpt in a minute. And actually, could you just, this is the Two Cellos project. Could you talk a little bit about how the project came together? And then we'll go into seeing the extract.
So Fiona Robinson from Sound Scotland approached me about the project because they were featuring the cello that year as their kind of key focus instrument of the festival. And she approached me about writing a piece for two cellos, and she recommended Nomi Boutin and Matthew Sharp, who were the cellists that I worked with, one French, one English. And basically what I decided to do was, because she wanted this focus around narratives between France and the UK, I decided to kind of get in a space with the two cellists, and so much of the piece was actually really collaboratively created. We spent time talking about their experiences as cellists, their relationship with their instrument, events that had happened with their cello that may not be of playing the cello, but other things that had happened with their cello. And that kind of fueled the shape of the piece. And so the piece is actually very, very specifically written for these two cellists and not kind of any two cellists.
And there was also another composer involved, Frédéric Patard, is that correct? And how did that work between you? And she's a French composer.
Sorry. Yes, he's a French composer. And so the way it worked is Frédéric was a little different than me. He didn't do the kind of same collaborative process, but Frédéric and I did have a collaborative process between the two of us, where I shared with him what text I might be using in the piece, and he shared the same with me, and what things that he was interested in focusing on. And then the idea was that the pieces would be performed as a double bill, which is how it originally kind of functioned in the original festival. But then it's been kind of combined and molded into one large work now, where our pieces kind of flow one into the other. And what's interesting is that despite us being completely different composers, it actually seems quite seamless going from Frédéric's work to mine and back again, which is fascinating because we are completely different.
And obviously a lot of the work you've done previously has been collaborative. Was there anything about this sort of Franco-British collaboration that was somehow different, or what were the sort of new things you took from that experience of working across these two countries in that way?
For me, the key element, and one of the key elements in the pieces, was communication. Nomi's English is not so good, as my French is also not so good, whereas Matthew is quite bilingual. So we found ourselves in this kind of collaborative space where Matthew was kind of like a translator between the two of us, which was quite fascinating. And so actually a lot of our difficulties in communicating and finding new ways and simpler ways to communicate was actually what fed into kind of the politics in the piece as well, and kind of the need for communication across borders, and how maybe that would improve society.
Great. Well, on improving society, we're about to go into hearing an excerpt from the film, which is called We Need to Talk, or Il faut qu'on parle. And the film is by Julien Cadillac. It was shot at the Théâtre Sainte-Marie-d'Ambas in Grenoble, commissioned by Compagnie Frotte Frappé and co-produced by Sound Festival in Aberdeen, and also the Centre International des Musiques Nomades, Festival des Tours de Babel in Grenoble. Let's see the extract.
Juin 1429, Jésus, Marie Noble, loyale, Frank Menov, Zeu, Tonov, Tournai, Tonner, Mani, Client, Capturé, Amtu, Adolfite, Teminbat,
Regardez.
Notazo, Yaluf, Suffolk, La Polyproté, Laure Talbot, Lorsqu'elle Avant capture and Zoyolov su folk Rotterland glace d'Alardi. Rotterland.
There was this chase scene in it. I was chasing with my cello, chasing this viola player. Strobe light. The space was a bit like this, and I was wearing not many clothes, kind of Theseus-esque. It was all very Greek. And I came on stage with my cello, chasing the viola player, running around chasing after this viola player. It was all really dirty and muddy. And he was reaching a pitchfork, getting faster and faster. And suddenly I'm flying through the air into the wall of the theatre. And I hit myself and hit my cello, and I sort of came to, and I was looking. The audience was there. It was all in front of an audience. I was looking down the back of the cello, and I thought, that's fine. Oh, my God. There was this huge hole in the back of the cello.
A damaged France, an exhausted Britain, loss of empire, loss of reputation, loss of wealth, loss of cohesion, loss.
Talk.
Il faut qu'on parle.
Yes, we need to talk.
Loss of cohesion, loss of confidence, problem of decline, problème de déclin. England,
Chaque jour.
Thank you so much, Laura. That is just beautiful. And it reminded me of what Jamie was saying just now about creating things that aren't like other things. That's like nothing else I've seen before. So thank you so much. We're moving on now to talk about the year we've just had. That project took place before all this hit us, didn't it? But I believe the other three of you were all the other three composers were all in different ways impacted. And actually, if I could put my Sound of Music hat on for a moment, referencing what Bertrand was saying earlier, we undertook a survey at Sound of Music with the Ivors Academy at the end of 2020 to find out how they'd been impacted by the pandemic. And the findings of this survey confirmed what we'd already been hearing anecdotally, which was that composers who typically earn their living through a mix of roles, through a mix of commissions, performances, royalties, teaching, media work, producing. The majority of composers that we surveyed had lost work and income. For some, this was not so significant, but for others, it was sort of devastating amounts, sort of 80%. And on average, it was around a third. And we'd also heard that the pandemic, unsurprisingly, had really affected people's mental health and sense of identity as artists and creators. And around a third of composers that we surveyed had at various points considered giving up completely. And we heard huge anxieties about the future, the massive uncertainty, things being postponed, cancelled. And we heard overwhelmingly that people had really missed working with other musicians that they'd been used to. So I wanted to ask you all, how has this last year been for you all? What have been your experiences? How has it affected you? Maybe I'll start with Tansy.
Well, I haven't stopped working. It's been really, really busy. But that's just because I had a lot going on before. I mean, at the point of lockdown 1, I had a big teaching job in USA, and I just decided to fly back on the very last point that I could have done, and I did that. And I had to continue with that job, which was pretty intense. And so I was teaching online, but also I had a commission, quite a big commission, for the Arditi Quartet. And the memory of that time for me is actually wonderful. I was working absolutely flat out, and it was really unexpected to be back in the UK, but I was incredibly happy to be back. So last spring was exhausting, but also exhilarating, and that was pretty wonderful. In terms of a loss of performances, well, I'm sure there have been things that would have come up. But I've been lucky, I have to say. I had a blissful sort of window in October when I had two important premieres, and they did actually happen in Germany. So I was very lucky there. And other things, for example, the piece I wrote for Court Circuit, that happened, and that was it was very, very nice, and it was a lovely thing to be part of. But I did miss the contact with the musicians. And one thing I have felt is that even though I feel very resourceful and very kind of self-reliant, and composers are used to being on our own for months on end, I did miss the feedback. And so on the few occasions where I have had a concert, whether it be online or what have you, and had some nice feedback or meaningful feedback, it's just been like quenching my thirst. It's been so, and you realize how important that is. Even, people think of composers as being sort of lone wolves in a way, but it's a very collaborative thing we're doing, because when we're working, we're always imagining the musicians we're writing for. So it's we miss them.
Thank you. And what about the others? How does that sit with you? Jamie, how's it been for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been consistently busy, but it's a very different type of busy. Some things that really should not be complicated become very complicated when you have to listen to things through Zoom, or right now I'm working with an artistic team. My next project is as composer and director, so I'm building scenography, and the whole process we've had to reshape everything. But I don't know. I mean, I really feel that I'm one of the lucky ones.
And what happened with your Diaphonique project, the orchestral piece?
Yeah, well, the premiere didn't happen, of course, and they rescheduled it for this March, but of course that couldn't happen. I don't know what the future of it will be. I think Chrysaline is trying to find a place where it can fit, but obviously in the grand scheme of things, there's just so much going on. It's very difficult.
And do you mind me asking, that's quite a sort of, for many people, that would be quite an adrenaline roller coaster, that it's on, it's off, it's back on, oh, it's off again. And how did you manage to kind of look after yourself, and how do you manage yourself through that kind of swinging around of things happening, not happening?
I have very, very good family. I have to say, is the only thing that really helped me survive. I mean, during the year, I did create an orchestral piece, which is probably the largest that I've ever done. And it really was just, love from family and friends who supported me when I needed it.
I think for many of us that resonates. And Laura, how has it been for you?
Yeah, I have been busy. I've been lucky enough to have enough work. The biggest thing for me, well, there's two things. One, I was about to sign my largest project to date as the pandemic started. And obviously it didn't get signed. And so I spent the kind of next 12 months not knowing whether this project was going to happen or not. And that was a very, very difficult process for me because I can be quite impatient. And so that was really hard because all the time, if I was getting offered other projects, which is wonderful, I'd be thinking, but what if that project comes off? And so now, thankfully, that project is going ahead, but it does mean that I have significantly less time to create the work, which obviously is not ideal, and that's not the situation any composer or creative wants to be in. But at the same time, the project is so important to me, and I'm very aware that if I don't take this chance now, then it might not happen. So it's a matter of just accepting that not having the extra 9 months is just a situation that it is. So that's been the biggest thing for me, I think. But also the aspect that Tansy was talking about with composers, yes, we're kind of lone wolves, but at the same time, that collaboration with musicians is absolutely vital fuel. And so I have found myself in a space of composing much more slowly than I normally do. And I think that's because I'm really starting to, I think I described it to you when I spoke to you before, Susanna. I feel like I'm kind of scraping in the deep crevices of my skull for any sense of creativity, because we're just not necessarily getting the external fuels of life experience and being with musicians in a room that we would normally get.
And Clementine, how has this year been for you?
So it had different stages. First, last year was a bit of a bummer because I personally rely a lot on being on the road, be it as a musician, as a bass player mostly. So I was touring all the time for the past 4 or 5 years. It was a bit my way of thinking music as well, and being very gregarious and seeing lots of musicians, jamming, improvising. And I had released my first album around that time, just before, and I was about to be touring in 2020. And obviously, well, no need to explain what happened. And then, so I found myself a bit lost, and I got very lucky actually in the process, because I was contacted by this organization, Music City, that got funded by Diaphonique to write a piece from home, obviously. And so it forced me to consider music a bit more inwards and have to reframe a bit what I wanted to know about what I could do. And I think I discovered a lot of myself into the process, but it was kind of difficult. And then things got more positive when things opened up a little bit around summer and in London, because I guess the next lockdowns were a bit less like a hammer blow, how to say that, hammer than the first one, what everything was really, really closed. So yeah, I made a second album, and I'm okay. I'm just looking forward to things to reopen, but at the same time, I'm kind of feeling, I'm way better than a year ago.
And in a minute, we're going to hear you play something. And just before you go and set up, can you just tell us a bit about what we're going to hear and when it came into life?
Yes. So it's I'm going to play 2 short songs, one song and one instrumental from an album that got released 2 months ago by a very nice Scottish label called Lost Map Records. So the thing is, in November, I was making music with other people because things were a bit more open just before November, actually, in September, October, with friends, with a band. And I was trying to write music for orchestra as well, and trying to play with a violinist in particular. And then the thing happened, and I got stuck again, but I was finding... So I had this fantasy of writing a folk guitar album, just me, basically. So I just took this time for, okay, let's do it in a month. I really wanted to have like a limitation of time. And so writing, recording in 1 month. And I called it Songs of Resilience, which is a bit, sounds a bit serious, but, but okay. It's not that serious all the time. But yeah, that's what happened. So what I'm going to play tonight is basically what you can hear in the album with subtle arrangements, but they're very invisible, or you can't hear them that well. That makes them even more beautiful.
And are you ready to play now?
Yeah, I'm going to set up a little bit, and then...
Shall we talk? Can you go straight away, or would you like us to do a little talking while you set up?
You could talk. I'll just a few seconds, but it won't take that long.
Okay.
A very short time.
Great.
Just to, I think going back to your initial question about how difficult it is, I think it really depends on where you are in your career. Same with me. I mean, I finished a film. I just think, oh my gosh, what if I hadn't even started? Would I ever even get there? And this is where I think a lot of people give up. This idea of giving up is probably for early career composers. It's just such a different reality. People who already have connections, people who already have a name versus people who are just starting. So yeah, I think all of us are really lucky in that sense, but it's not to say that it's I can understand where that comes from.
And in terms of the film, because this is being released today, films are hugely collaborative. I don't need to tell you that. How did that work over the last year, and what happened?
I was just very lucky because we finished the film. Literally, we were meant to premiere it at South by Southwest, and the day that I finished the online edit, the day that I went and had a drink for the first time in months, was the day that the States, the festival canceled, and the day that the States basically went into lockdown. So in a way, it was this lockdown again in a similar situation. I felt just so lucky that I actually had finished the film and I could actually just breathe and relax. But I didn't expect it to last this long. And there were, similar situation. There were lots of things that basically just didn't happen, got canceled, postponed. And I think a lot of the things that got postponed probably are now canceled. A lot of the screenings. And then, and then lots of festivals are postponing. But but again, I feel like a lot of the people on the stage, like very, very lucky that I was at that point with my film and at this point with my career.
Clementine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is when we really feel the lack of an audience, and everyone out there will be clapping. I have to say, sort of being in the same room as live music is quite overwhelming after all this time. So thank you so much, Clementine.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
It's overwhelming for me too. Haven't played those songs, never played them, so I'm like, oh. I mean, I could record them, but
I feel quite choked up. But I've got to try and pull myself together. Continue with the next bit. So here we are, hopefully coming out of this terrible year for the world. Although it's been really inspiring to hear so many examples of how you've all been creative and dealt with it in so many ways. And it raises a really important question about how do we want to go forward from now. If we think about some of the lessons or some of the things that we've observed over the last year, on the one hand, in terms of the arts, we've seen them in the UK, certainly, and I'm interested to hear actually how it's been in France, but certainly in the UK, it has been a real battle to persuade our political masters to really pay attention to the impact of this terrible pandemic on a workforce which is largely freelance and very sort of fragile, with many people having many different roles and very little security. It's been very difficult to get the plight of the freelancers is terrible. They haven't been given enough attention, and it's very difficult to get the government to sort of pay attention to the arts. They're too busy thinking about, is it the Super League? I believe they call it. On the other hand, one of the things that we have seen over this lockdown is that people out there, the kind of the public, the wider people out there in society have really turned to music. And that's backed up by these amazing listener figures from all the music radio stations, that somehow in this time of great crisis and pain for us as a society, and this very unnatural situation of being separated from other people, the thing that people have absolutely sought to engage with is music. So whether that's for solace or for distraction or for entertainment, whatever, but that's been the case. So, you know, we know how powerful our art form is, but then how do we want it to be ahead of us? What is the role? What is the future role of the artist in society, of the arts in society? What are your, do any of the panels have a particular view? How would you like things to go forward? What role do you think the arts can have in the future?
Well, I think we need universal basic income for people, because, you know, making this film has taken a massive toll on my finances, obviously, and I got nothing from the government. I got no support. And it's just, you know, friends in Germany, people that were freelancers, they just all got 5,000 euros. Like, why didn't we get that? Like, why is it that people who have security got more security and people who have no security got no security?
Other thoughts on this? Jamie?
Yeah, well, it's quite clear, I think. Yeah, why?
I don't have an answer to the why. So don't look at me like that. But it is what would need to, why is it different? Why is it different in France and Germany than it is here? What have we somehow got wrong, which meant that people didn't look at the artists and think, my goodness, these people need support?
I think it's probably, well, from my perspective, it seems to stem from the lack of focus or appreciation of the arts from actually the early years going upwards. It's actually in education. And I think that if we place more of a focus on arts education from an early age through to teenage years, then inevitably the society will hopefully have a stronger appreciation of the arts in general. And I think that kind of thinning down of that aspect of the syllabus is really problematic, and inevitably is going to have an effect on the livelihoods of artists and creatives.
And yet there's so much evidence that creative education from a young age is transformative, not just in creating the artists of the future, but actually in so many kinds of human development as well. What is the resistance to that education, that kind of regard and understanding of what the arts can do? What is the problem?
I don't know. I think it's a fear of individual thought. I feel like that's what creativity fosters, whether you become a scientist, a mathematician, an engineer, that new creativity for all of these things. And that's individual thought. And the more individual thought there is, maybe the harder a society might be to control.
Clementine?
I think it's useless, what we do. I mean, it's not, but, considered as something that makes money or something that it's a prototype economy as well. Like nothing is, you make a film, it's just, it's one film. And so they don't care. It's totally pointless. And like you can live without music, books or movies. It's true, but that's how society is driven these days, I find. And yeah, and the more, I mean, it's a tricky subject because you could say making money for business can also invest in amazing art and things that need to happen in the past. But I think, yeah, some people have more utilitarian views on those things than we tend to do here.
And Tansy, do you have a sense of what is the most courageous role that an artist can play in society now at this point in our history and going forward? Sorry, big question for you. And a brief answer, please. No, reflect as much as you like.
So let me think. Well, I'm sort of, through my own work, fascinated by the idea of trying to work out, remember who we are as a species, remember who our spirit is, what it is. And for me, it's connected very much to nature as well. So some of the earliest art that we know about is cave art, 40,000 years old, and older. And clearly, within those societies, that was considered economically fine for people to spend a long time creating these works. And I think that now it's absolutely essential for a healthy society. So I disagree. I feel we're kind of, sometimes we're kind of emergency services for the spirit. And we do, so I personally believe that art is so important. It's invisible and you can't put a cost on it, a price on it, an income from it. But that's why it's so amazing. And we're lucky in music that it's sort of less pin downable, I think, than visual arts. And I do think it's incredibly powerful. So I think the role of the artist is a kind of healer. And we don't really, have religious models at the moment that are things that we can all kind of trust in because they're kind of old and decrepit, a lot of the main religions, as much as we might want them not to be. And I think art can help us remember who we are. And as Laura said, make the mind more supple, so that we can be creative and a creative society can blossom, I think. And for me, the kind of idea of the imbalance we have at the moment, which is all about doing and achieving and creating money. I mean, that's one thing, and that's fine to have those ambitions, but we also need the time to nurture and be still and take care of things which are not obviously, kind of show a reward, but you can't kind of scientifically prove that these things are valid and are helping people to do things. But I think everyone I know listens to music. So in fact, that's the way I kind of think about the balance, the two polarities on this planet, which we could also call gender, it's the kind of two kinds of ways of using energy, a sort of more active thing when you're making things happen, and a more passive thing where you're going within and actually thinking deeply about what you want to make happen. And so I think one of the things that we do when we're creating music is we're sort of balancing energies. And that's what I'm consciously trying to do, so that I'm trying to work with these two types of energy to help the kind of workforce of artists rebalance the energy on Earth.
Wow, thank you, Tansy. It really relates, I think, to something that Lisa was saying earlier about I think the arts, the music can teach us to listen as well as to do. And we're about to hear actually an extract from your opera Cave, The Mirror Cracks. And just could you say briefly what are we about to see on the screen? What's happening? What should people be aware of?
Well, of my two operas, both of them are kind of not what you might expect to be sort of in the sense of a classic drama. They're more like an inner excavation, as kind of excavation of the human spirit, and particularly so with Cave. So it's about a man who's lost his daughter, and she's an eco-warrior and presumed to be dead, but he doesn't know, and he goes into a cave to try and reconnect with her, because this is a place where they went when she was a child and she loved it. And this is a moment after he feels he has summoned her. And so he's actually brewed himself some kind of mushroom tea, we think. It's not absolutely clear. And he has this wonderful duet with her, and she's like an electronic bird. But then it turns terrifying, and he actually has kind of psychotic episode, which is all part of his shedding of the carapace of heaviness of human life, and kind of rediscovering who he is. So that's it.
Great, thank you. So we're about to hear The Mirror Cracks, which is an excerpt of Tansy's opera Cave, as we've just heard. And this was co-commissioned by the London Sinfonietta and the Royal Opera House.
Shadow-sticks the cartoon. When the light in grief, skin and my child is lost, don't leave me on brink of augury in the relentless rain nil by mouth or quad squad. Stab in the dark, and my child is lost. Don't leave me down by the faulty dark sea crowd, shadow shift. Coins on tongues under infrared sun. Phosphorus moon, the birds arise. Rodents screaming interference. Manifest of storm warning, the alarm. Bell rings backwards, and no fairy lights its soul. Comes, and my child is lost. Don't. The extinguished young lights its soul. Leave me, arrest me. Inside circle. Don't leave me. Falling in my sleep, and demands my heart. And folds me close in its soul. Black wings. I like it all. Does it look like the sieht soll. Who said this? I'd like to know. Let's it's all.
Thanks, Tansy. Wow, my heart was pumping at various points in that. That's some incredible, such drama in even that short excerpt. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So in this final part of the discussion, we're going to discuss something that goes to the very heart of what Diaphonique is all about, which is the different roles that France and the UK and the two countries together can play in supporting artists to create work, to seek new partnerships, to develop as artists, to collaborate. And so I'm interested to hear from the panel, what has your experience of that been? What have been the differences between the two countries? What roles have they played in your development? Are there things that one country can learn from the other? And actually, Clementine, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind starting with you as being the French person living in London. How have your two trajectories in these countries compared?
That's a wide question. I feel I had one thing I really sometimes miss a little bit about France, but at the moment, I mean, we're all equal because we're all living in the same health conditions. But I think there is a network of regional venues and funded by states or regions, which allowed me to discover many music genres for my development, like music, classical music in particular, and contemporary, plus jazz and everything that is like broadened from that. Sorry for the mic. And this is something, and they were like shows are quite cheap, and like it helps like lots of students or people who are music fans, buffs to get into a broad knowledge. And I think sometimes I'm feeling that missing a little bit here. On the other side, on a pure performing level, I find playing in London and in the UK in general, because I travel quite a bit everywhere in the country for the past 5 years, I find incredible the network of venues to play. It goes from the pub, which I love. I really love performing in pubs, to playing in middle-sized venues, and I found myself in very short amount of time where no one knew me, given lots of slots of for example, I did lots of support shows for big American bands, for example, and things like that. That kind of thing I would have gotten in France, but in waiting way longer. So I find there are more gatekeepers in France in my personal experience. At the same time, it may be a bit more democratic in terms of access to things. So that's it's very cliche, so I'm sorry about that. But it's a bit of in a few words, my experience.
And did you feel that being now based in the UK, has that affected your identity as an artist?
Well, it's interesting because I integrated the fact that I had the two identities in my own music, so with the French language and the English language. So I'm not trying to be too brainy about that, but I'm still like thinking about mixing the two elements. Otherwise, I don't know. I find it more. I think there is a small privilege of being from elsewhere here, obviously, because you're less likely to know the rules, or you can reinvent yourself quite easily. Because I think it sounds more easy, and people have the expectation of your accent or the way you behave is more tolerated. Maybe if I'm not like crazy, but I could be. But but sometimes, I'm feeling like I have a broader choice in things. But also, I guess it's when you're far away from your native country, you tend to be more free in some ways. If you're lucky to have the economic conditions for that, obviously.
Which is similar to exactly what you were saying earlier, Jamie, about how when you're working outside the UK, somehow it's a different experience from working here. And you've worked a lot in France as well as in England. How has your experiences in those two countries, how have they helped shape you as an artist, and what impact have they had on your development, do you think?
Well, I mean, my education in England, I think, was really fantastic. I really had great teachers. Studying in Birmingham, there was a BCMG, which is where I used to just go and hang out and watch rehearsals. I did some page turning gigs, sort of got involved, and people were very open. I think, well, I've found certainly, just as Clementine says, that to go to another country, you see yourself in a different pool and you see yourself differently. And I think that level of self-reflection and learning who you are and maybe who you want to be, I think is really important. My relationship with France, I think it really began with ENOA, which is the European Network of Opera Academies. They really, and Festival Aix-en-Provence, they really gave me my first opportunities to meet particularly directors and composers and conductors, and be involved in a festival at a really high standard, really high level. But to really give a young artist the opportunity to really be involved, really follow productions, to speak to the directors and speak to the artists, and not just be sort of the education program on the side. And I think what I really love about France is the history of philosophy, but also the way that it's developed ideas around psychology. So like discovering Jacques Lacan, and then Alain Badiou, that sort of school of thinking. It really opened up a lot of questions and possibilities about life that I never thought about before. And then later on, of course, writers like, I don't know how to say her name properly, if it's Annie Ernaux, is that right? Which I think now she's being translated into English. I'm discovering the way that she was so, or is so brave in the way that she writes about, particularly about love, about passion, about her sexuality as a heterosexual female. That really gave me a lot of energy. That really said, "Oh, someone else has done this. Actually, yeah, you can do it too." So really, it's discovering the literature and the culture that really was very important to me.
And we're about to hear an excerpt of a piece of yours, Filson Ecstasy, which was commissioned by the Opéra National du Rhin. Can you? I'm obviously very intrigued by the title, and I'm sure everyone listening at home would appreciate a little insight into that, and just maybe say a bit about that work. And does it, in terms of what you've been talking about, your incredible sort of deep dive into French philosophy and really getting into the culture in that way, and that's clearly been very important for you. Is that part of this piece, or is it something completely different?
Yeah, well, the piece was actually written. It was originally written for dance, so more specifically ballet. And there was a text of all the research material we had. The text that really grabbed me was Michel Foucault's seven propositions on the seventh angel, it talks about language and the origins of the French language from the sounds. It's a preface to a very strange work by Brizet about the origin of French language, that actually it's pre-Latin. It's from the sounds that people were, or the original people were speaking around the swamps or the grunts, and language before words. So then, and I found it fascinating because in my lived experience, it's the moments in life where where the language, well, I'd say the language of our mouths really go back to grunts, to breathlessness. And I found that there is, between our ideas of filth and our ideas of ecstasy, there is a marriage between the two, and a relationship, a bond between the two things, which for me are quite inseparable.
And on that, let's hear it. Wow, thank you so much, Jamie. You know, as I was listening, I was thinking these sounds are so original and particular to you. They also take me right back to the beginning of this discussion and these incredible women in your film, Lisa. Both some of the originality of the sounds and this sort of unfettered sense of not having to be like other things, the sort of I don't want to sort of project onto you, Jamie, but it's almost like a kind of a real determination to create sounds that are not like other sounds in quite a sort of powerful, in a really powerful way. So thank you so much. And that draws us towards the close of tonight's event. I want to thank my panelists hugely. There's a few things to cover before we sign off. So as we mentioned earlier, Diaphonique, the Franco-British Fund for Contemporary Music, has its calls for applications currently open and is welcoming new music projects until the 16th of May. I would like to thank so warmly my wonderful co-panelists, Tansy, Laura, Jamie, Clementine, Lisa. Thank you so much for being so generous and thoughtful and sharing your art and your insights with us tonight, and for so many interesting perspectives on the role of women composers in classical and contemporary music. Thank you so much. Thanks to you, the public online, for joining us, and to the Institut Français du Royaume-Uni for hosting this special evening in the Cinéma Lumière. And a special thanks to the lovely team at the Institut Français and the French Embassy who organised this panel and were so efficient and delightful and wonderful to deal with. We would like to extend our warmest thanks to all the partners who supported this event on both sides of the channel. And these include Modern Films, Sound and Music, Futur Composé, the Centre Présence Compositrice, Compose Her, the Global Foundation for the Performing Arts, the Ballet of the Opéra National du Rhin, the Orchestre de Chambre de Paris, the Court Circuit Ensemble, Sound Festival, the International Centre for Nomad Music's Festival d'Etour de Babel, Music City, Faber Music, Rayfield Allied, NMC Recordings, Lost Map Records, and Alternative Classical. The film of this evening is going to remain available on the Institute's Facebook and YouTube accounts. Thank you so much for tuning this evening. Please stay safe and have a great evening. Thank you.